The Sooners have taken the field for the very first time this spring as practice sessions open up, counting down to Oklahoma's spring game on April 22nd. I'm Parker Thune alongside Jesse Crittenden here on the OU Insider YouTube channel. And earlier this week, we got the opportunity to meet with Oklahoma head coach Brent Venables as he enters his second year at the helm of the Sooners program. And one of the things I think that made the rounds on social media more so than Venables' typical quotes and snippets from any one particular press conference on this Monday was his statement, Jesse, on which you wrote a story over at OUinsider.com, that he expects his team to be on another planet defensively. That's a direct quote, on another planet defensively in 2023. And this is not necessarily a statement of doubt, Jesse, but more just an opportunity for us to engage in some discourse around this particular topic. I want to ask you, how realistic do you think it is for Oklahoma to be on another planet defensively, as Venables has termed it?
That's a good question. I think it depends on the way you interpret what he said. If you interpret it as on another planet means they're going to be one of the best defenses in the country right away this season, then no, I don't know how realistic that is. If you take it, I think I took what he said more as there is just going to be, not only, obviously there's going to be improvement, they're going to be better, but I think structurally that defense is going to be different than last year. And he didn't just say that. I mean, he broke it down. It was one of the longest answers he gave in the press conference. He gave a lot of reasons for that optimism. Obviously, some of the young talent they brought in, some of the young talent that was on the roster last year, some of the transfer portal guys they brought in that should make an impact right away. All of those reasons. But I think the thing that stuck out the most to me was his comments about how not only was everybody kind of new to the system last year, but that I think he kind of implied that it was a culture shock for everybody to go from Alex Grinch's defense to the Brent Venables defense. And I think it was the thing he touched on the most was the idea that there is just going to be a better understanding with those guys that were on the team last year to this year and how to play in Venables defense. So I think going back to your question, I don't know how realistic it is to go from one of the worst defenses in the country last year to one of the best defenses, if that's how you took it. But I took it as some of the mistakes that they made seem to stem from a lack of understanding of the concepts. And I think he, if nothing else, is confident that those type of issues won't be the case this year. But no, I mean, again, even if you're more optimistic about the defense this year, like I am, I don't know if they're going to be a top 10 defense this year. And I'm not sure he meant it that way, but I didn't take it that way.
Well, again, it's a very, very subjective statement that is very open to interpretation. So I will say this, based on the way that I interpret that statement, just looking at where Oklahoma ranked in the FBS in terms of defense in 2022, 99th out of 131 teams in scoring defense, 122nd out of 131 teams in total defense. So you almost have to be on another planet defensively in 2023. Otherwise, you got issues, Jesse. You got problems. People are going to start to squirm in their seats a little bit. And I think they're already squirming a little after the 6-7 campaign that Oklahoma endured, just because nobody really saw that coming. But I also think that the general public, the consensus verdict in the court of public opinion is that, okay, we're willing to write that off as kind of a blip on the radar. You need more than just a few months to completely overhaul a culture and a roster. So we're going to give Venables time. We're going to give this staff time. We're going to be patient with it. That said, heading into 2023, year two is where things have to change, because you have guys that have played a ton of snaps in this defense before. And yeah, you lose some contributors, right? You lose Jalen Redmond. You lose David Agwebu to the transfer portal. You lose Jeffrey Johnson up front. So the Sooners have more than a few starters to replace, but at the same time, you bring back guys that played a ton of snaps and that started for this defense a year ago in Billy Bowman and Danny Stutzman and Woody Washington. And you bring in experienced transfers, the likes of Deshaun McCullough and Reggie Pearson. So if you're not on another planet defensively, and that doesn't necessarily mean you have a top 10 defense, that just means You don't have a bad defense. Because again, numerically, you look at the statistics, you look at where Oklahoma ranked, their defense was not mediocre in 2022. It was bad. So you have to ascend out of that territory if you're going to get people believing in what you're building at Oklahoma. And I expect that to happen, Jesse. I think it's a reasonable expectation that that happens. Now, what it's contingent upon in my eyes is how ready are some of the young guns on this defense, because there was a ton of dead weight on the back end of the depth chart a year ago. The Sooners did not have a ton of depth at all, especially at linebacker. Much was made of that reality, but you bring back a lot of the same players, and there are some good players on the defensive side of the ball, some good veterans in guys like Stutzman and Washington and Billy Bowman. But by the same token, you need more than just those guys playing good ball if you're going to elevate your defense as a whole, because those guys didn't play bad ball last year. Yeah, it wasn't always perfect, but they didn't play bad ball by any means. Stutzman led the Big 12 in tackles. Bowman was arguably the most valuable piece of that defense from his safety position. So to me, it's what you can squeeze out of guys like Jaron Kanik, who presumably is going to be inheriting a starting role for the first time. Kendall Dolby or Gentry Williams, the two cornerbacks that are going to be battling to start opposite Woody Washington. Our Mason Thomas, who's going to be very squarely in the mix to start off the edge. And then, of course, you look at the freshman class and a bunch of guys that are chomping at the bit and ready, and PJ Adebawore and Makari Vickers and Sammy Omasigo, for instance. So how ready are the newcomers? And not just the newcomers, but the guys that were lower down the depth chart last year because they were new to the system. I think of Gentry Williams, and I think of Robert Spears Jennings, and I think of Kobe McKenzie as well. Guys like that. What can you get out of those guys, and how ready are they to take that next step in terms of production? I have an answer to this question that I've already formulated in my head, but I want to hear your response first. Who is the most valuable player on Oklahoma's defense in 2023? Who do you expect to have the most significant individual season?
Oh man, that's a really good question. I honestly, the first answer that came to me is Danny Stutzman. I really do. I really think it's Danny Stutzman for a lot of reasons. I think Brent Venables has put a lot of pressure on him. Obviously, there was a lot of production from him last year, but obviously some inconsistencies and some things like that. But I mean, Brent not only has gone to bat for him probably more than any other player, but I think Brent has put a lot of pressure on him to be the leader of that defense. I think he's one of the only guys you could put in Penn as having a starting spot on the defense already in the spring. But I think as much as the team needs this young talent to step up and be successful, they really need a leader, somebody who can be at the core of that defense. And I think the best candidate for that is Danny Stutzman, or if you want to look another direction, it's someone like Billy Bowman. I think those two guys offer the combination of experience, production, and just being in that program. What's your answer to that?
My answer is Billy Bowman, because, man, just getting the chance to see him in practice the other day in the open session, the physical leap that he has made, and it was noticeable, right, from his freshman year to his sophomore year, how much more muscular and physically imposing he was. There's been a similar leap already this offseason, and it's only been, not even 3 months since the 2022 season concluded. Billy Bowman looks like an NFL safety, and I've said it so many times. I've mentioned this play so many times, but the center field interception that he made against Oklahoma State back in November off Spencer Sanders, where I'm standing there on the sideline, Jesse. It looks like Spencer Sanders has a wheel route to the end zone. He's got a receiver streaking wide open. It looks like a walk-in touchdown for Oklahoma State. And here comes Billy Bowman flying out of nowhere, making an interception look easy. And so that he's just one of those guys where his instincts, his speed, his acceleration, and his willingness to come downhill as well, and not just be a coverage safety, but be an all-around safety, I think make him so valuable in this defense. And I loved watching Delarian Turner yell when he was at Oklahoma, just because he was the complete package and he could and would do it all. I see a lot of those same traits in Billy Bowman, and I'm really excited to see what that looks like in 2023 on the football field. Now, I want to ask you this. There are two sides to every coin, right? And the Sooners do have a very impressive freshman class on the defensive side of the ball. Is it a good thing, or is it more of a concern if you have Peyton Bowen and PJ Adebawore and Makari Vickers and those types of guys playing a ton of snaps right off the bat? Because, for instance, Kenneth Murray started and played a ton of snaps in 2017 as a true freshman because he was a freak show, right? Latrell McCutcheon played a lot of snaps in 2021 as a true freshman because, well, Oklahoma really didn't have a better option. So do you view it as more of a good thing, more of a credit to what the Sooners have been able to recruit on the defensive side of the ball in Venables' first cycle? Or do you view it as a concern about some of the veterans in the group on that side of the football if you see some of those true freshmen playing quite a bit immediately?
I think you could argue both ways. I think I can kind of see both sides of it, but I would lean towards I think it would be really impressive if some of those freshmen can make an impact right away. I think mostly because, again, you mentioned some of the contributors from last year's team that are no longer on the roster, but I actually feel better about this defense as a whole than I did last season. And I think, and you kind of mentioned it when we talked the other day about Peyton Bowen. How long is it going to be before he proves too good to leave off the field? I don't think he's the only guy in that conversation, but I also think we've talked about it before, how much Venables and his coaching staff prioritizes experience. So I think that's always going to be their first look. But I think guys like him and PJ Adebawore in particular, but you mentioned Makari Vickers, there's other guys that I expect to be meaningfully in the rotation and maybe push for starting spots. And I think that's impressive, not only because of their talent, and I think OU is going to need them regardless. I think OU is going to need them, but also because I do think if you look at every position, I'm not saying there's an elite veteran at every position that should take that spot, but OU does have veterans, particularly from the transfer portal, that are a little bit more ready to play right away. So if there are several freshmen that end up making a big impact, I think that's more of a testament to them, and also maybe more of a testament to the coaching staff being a little bit more willing to play underclassmen than they were last year. I think it's both of those things.
If there's a player on the defensive side of the ball that isn't an incumbent starter and isn't a true freshman, but caught somewhere in that twilight zone that you think isn't being talked about enough, who do you think that player is?
I think it's R. Mason Thomas. I do. I think the little time that he's been on the field, just the way, even seeing him on the practice field yesterday, he just does not look like an underclassman. He just simply doesn't. And the tools that he had coming out of high school, that's a guy that's going to make a big time impact, whether that's this year or next year. He's going to make a big time impact. I think he's the exact kind of just balls to the wall, get in the backfield, sack the quarterback kind of guy. I think this OU team desperately needs athleticism, particularly on the edge. I think he's a guy that can provide that. And he was one of the guys that stood out to me at practice yesterday as a guy that his body looks more ready than it was last year, and I expect him to make a big impact. Who would you say?
Man, I tell you what, I've been sitting on my Robert Spears Jennings stock since before his senior year of high school, and I'm just waiting to cash it in. I think that could come as early as this season. That said, with the logjam that Oklahoma has in the safety room, maybe it is until 2024 that you really see Spears Jennings come into his own in the back end, though. Regardless, that is a guy that is big enough and fast enough and smart enough and just impressive enough as a physical specimen that once he gets on the field and once he develops that level of comfort within the system and he's flying around and making plays and growing in his confidence, I think you're going to see that guy morph into an all-conference type of player. Now, I could not agree more with your assessment of R. Mason Thomas. That's another guy where I wish more people would study the tape. I wish more people would look at the film before they write off a guy just because he's a 3-star, because R. Mason Thomas was a 3-star coming out of high school. If you turned on his senior film and you watched that dude in action, it was very clear that that was not your run-of-the-mill 3-star guy. And that was a guy that was going to force his way onto the field at the collegiate level pretty early on in the process. Even I didn't expect that it might come as early as it did for him, especially with him getting to campus last June as a mid-year enrollee, or not a mid-year enrollee, but as a standard June enrollee, excuse me. But yeah, Thomas is a guy that I actually do expect to start. I think he is one of your starting edges in 2023. So very, very excited to see what he can bring. And he's beefed up to 239 pounds as of yesterday when Oklahoma released the spring roster. He was playing at 222 a year ago. So you want to talk about gains? That guy has made them. That's going to do it for this installment of Quick Slants. I'm Parker Thune alongside Jesse Crittenden. We'll keep you covered with lots more content here on this channel as Oklahoma winds down to its spring game on April 22nd. We'll see you next time.